All right, let's dive deep into this concept of self-discipline. With Ryan Holiday's Discipline is Destiny, I'm so excited to unearth some really cool wisdom from all sorts of historical figures, see how they dealt with this whole self-control thing, this willpower thing. I mean, it's something we all wrestle with, even today, right?
Yeah, totally.
So are you ready to jump in? I know I am.
I am. I think it's fascinating how these stories from way back when can still feel like so relevant, to our lives now. And I think we'll be able to unearth like unexpected strategies and mindsets that you can actually use.
Yeah, level up your self-discipline game.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so the book opens with this classic story of Hercules at the crossroads, right?
Yeah.
That choice between, a life of ease versus a life of doing the hard things.
Right.
That lead to virtue. And what's interesting is that Holiday doesn't just present this as some ancient myth.
Yeah.
He connects it to our daily lives.
It's true. He highlights these mini Hercules moments that we all face. Think about even the snooze button in the morning. That's a microcosm of that choice.
Right.
Instant gratification.
Yeah.
Or pushing yourself towards something better.
Right.
It's a really clever way to frame it. I think it's something we all experience, those daily struggles,
Yeah, for sure. But it's not just about making the right choice in those moments, is it?
Yeah.
The book goes deeper into Aristotle's idea of virtue as a craft.
Yeah.
Something you develop through practice. And that's so different from how we usually think about it, right?
Yeah, I think so. Normally we think about, virtue as you're either a virtuous person or you're not. But Aristotle was saying no, it's about doing virtuous actions consistently until they become second nature. It's imagine learning to play the piano. You don't just wake up one day and you're a virtuoso. It takes hours of practice,
Yeah.
hitting wrong notes, getting frustrated, pushing through until it becomes part of who you are.
That's a really helpful way, I think, to think about building self-discipline. It takes the pressure off, needing to be perfect all the time.
Totally, yeah. And it highlights the importance of patience, persistence, which we're going to see come up a lot in this book. But one of the first places it comes up is with this analogy of temperance as the charioteer.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me.
Yeah.
Okay, explain this charioteer thing.
Sure.
For our listener.
Yeah.
What does that even mean in terms of self-discipline?
Okay, so imagine a charioteer trying to control two powerful horses. One represents our impulses, our desires pulling us toward instant gratification, whereas the other one represents our rational mind,
Right.
aiming for, long-term goals.
Right.
And temperance is the skill of holding those reins steady, right?
Yeah.
Finding that balance between indulging
Right.
and controlling those impulses.
So it's not about denying yourself completely, but about finding that sweet spot of, control.
Yeah, exactly.
But how do we actually do that?
Yeah.
I mean, those horses seem pretty strong, right?
Yeah. And that's where I think the book gets really practical and introduces us to these historical figures who mastered the skill. One example is Lou Gehrig, the Iron Horse of baseball.
Right.
Played over 2,000 consecutive games, pushing through injuries, fatigue, all of that stuff.
Yeah, I remember reading about him. Wasn't his streak ultimately detrimental to his health? How does that fit into this temperance thing?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And it highlights, I think, the potential downsides
Right.
of unchecked discipline.
Right.
Gehrig's dedication was legendary.
Yeah.
But perhaps he could have benefited from a bit more temperance by, listening to his body.
Right.
Prioritizing long-term health over short-term achievements.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even positive qualities, can become harmful.
Right.
If taken to extremes.
So how do we find that balance? Does the book offer any clues?
Well, it emphasizes the importance of strategizing, prioritizing. One example we see is Toni Morrison waking up before dawn to write.
Right.
Carving out those precious hours,
Yeah.
when her mind was fresh, free from distractions.
The attack the dawn strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I've tried that before, but I always seem to fall back into my old habits. What's the secret to making it stick?
I think that's something we all struggle with. But, what the book highlights is it's not just about willpower. It's about creating systems, routines that support our goals.
Yeah.
One example, think about Richard Feynman.
Oh, yeah.
This brilliant physicist who just abruptly quit drinking,
Oh,
who
yeah.
regained control over his time, his focus.
Okay, so he just went cold turkey. That seems pretty extreme.
Yeah.
It
might seem that way, but for Feynman, it was about recognizing like the negative impact of his habit and just like making a decisive change. And similarly, we see like Eisenhower quit smoking cold turkey.
Right.
And so both of these figures demonstrate that like to break free from these destructive patterns, it often requires a like radical shift in mindset action.
So it's not about easing into change. It's about making a clear commitment.
Exactly.
Sticking to it.
Yeah.
That's a pretty powerful lesson, I think. But it also raises the question, how do we know when a habit needs to be like completely eradicated versus moderated?
Yeah, and that's where like self-awareness comes in. And the book encourages us to examine our habits and their impact on our lives. And, for instance, Cato the Elder, he was known for his frugality. Like he rejected expensive possessions to maintain his independence.
But wasn't that a bit extreme? I mean, surely there's a middle ground. Right?
I totally, yeah. And that's where this concept of like minimizing superfluous desires comes in. Cato understood that the more we chase after material things, the more dependent we become on them and the less freedom we have to make choices that like align with our values.
So it's not about deprivation, but about consciously choosing what we give our like attention and energy to.
Totally.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But what about those times when our like dedication to work or a goal, it starts to like take over our lives?
Yeah.
I feel like I've been there before.
Right.
Pushing myself to the point of like burnout.
Yeah, I think that's a common struggle. And the book offers some compelling examples of both the like benefits and dangers of pushing too hard. Like take Greg Popovich, this like renowned basketball coach, famously rested his star players to prevent burnout.
Right.
Even though it cost him fines, criticism,
Yeah, that's a pretty bold move, especially in a competitive environment like professional sports.
Totally.
But I guess it paid off in the long run, right?
Yeah.
These teams were pretty successful.
It did. And he understood that like sustainable success requires like managing our energy, our workload, not just like pushing ourselves to the limit all the time. And it's a stark contrast to the story of James Forrestal, who dedicated himself tirelessly to his work as Secretary of Defense, but at a like great personal cost.
So Forrestal's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of neglecting like our well-being in the pursuit of achievement.
Totally. It's a reminder that our work should not come at the expense of like our health, relationships, and overall well-being. It's about finding that balance between striving for excellence and honoring like our human limitations.
That's a powerful reminder, and one that I think many of us need to hear in today's always-on culture. So where do we go from here? How do we start implementing these ideas into our own lives?
Well, the book like dives deeper into specific strategies, habits that can help us cultivate self-discipline. And we'll explore those in more detail in the next part of our deep dive. Welcome back.
All right.
Ready to uncover like more strategies for mastering self-discipline?
Absolutely. I'm particularly interested in like the practical side of things.
Yeah.
Like how do we actually apply these historical examples to our modern lives?
Yeah. Well, the book offers some fascinating insights into like how we manage our energy, our focus. And, we talked about the importance of rest, avoiding burnout, but it goes beyond just physical recovery.
Right. We were just discussing the tragic case of James Forrestal, right? Who like pushed himself to the point of exhaustion. But then there's, Greg Popovich strategically resting his players to prevent burnout. It's a fascinating contrast.
Yeah, it is. And the book then kind of highlights Queen Elizabeth II as like someone who embodies both dedication and restraint.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily think of a monarch as like a paragon of self-discipline.
Right.
Like you'd think they can just indulge in anything they want.
Yeah, you'd think so, right.
Yeah.
But she is known for her like consistent dedication to duty and a remarkable level of self-control. The book specifically mentions her practice of like meticulously reading every dispatch in the Queen's Red Box.
Right.
Which contains like government documents, briefings.
So even though she's the queen, she's not like above, doing the hard work.
Right.
Even when no one's forcing her.
Right.
It's almost like a quiet form of discipline that most people never see.
Yeah, exactly. It's that commitment to doing what needs to be done, even when it's tedious.
Yeah.
Unglamorous.
Right.
It reminds me of George Washington. and his dedication to approaching situations with the calm light of mild philosophy.
Oh, right. He wasn't just some, stoic robot, right?
Yeah.
Didn't he struggle with his temper early on?
He did. He actively cultivated this philosophical approach to help him control his emotions.
Right.
Make rational decisions.
So it's like a mindfulness practice almost.
Yeah.
Becoming aware of those impulses and choosing how we respond instead of just reacting.
Totally, yeah. And it ties into the importance of, saying no.
Right.
The book shares the story of Booker T. Washington, who dedicated his life to educating Black Americans, and he would often decline social invitations.
Right.
So he could focus on his work.
But isn't there a danger in isolating yourself too much?
Oh, for sure.
Don't we need connection and social interaction?
Totally. And I think the key here is, being intentional.
Right.
It's not about becoming a hermit, but about recognizing what truly matters to us.
Yeah.
And making choices that align with those priorities.
Right.
Washington understood the value of his time.
Yeah.
And guarded it fiercely.
That's something I struggle with constantly. It's
Yeah.
so easy to get caught up in the whirlwind.
Right.
Totally. Of obligations and distractions.
Yeah. And that's why cultivating focus
Right.
is so crucial. And the book highlights Beethoven's ability to just completely immerse himself in his music.
Right.
Even in the midst of chaos.
Yeah.
It's like he had this superpower.
Right.
To shut out the world and just create.
But wasn't Beethoven known for being quite difficult and temperamental?
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a connection between his intense focus
Yeah.
and his sometimes erratic behavior.
That's an insightful observation. Perhaps his intense focus came at a cost in other areas of his life. It raises the question of whether there's a point where discipline can become detrimental.
Right.
If it's not balanced with other qualities like empathy and flexibility.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like anything else.
Yeah.
It needs to be in harmony with,
Totally.
the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
Speaking of balance, the book also talks about the importance of patience.
Right.
Right. It uses the example of Joyce Carol Oates,
Right.
the prolific novelist.
Yeah. Her career is a testament to both dedication and patience. She didn't rush her work or succumb to the pressure to constantly produce new material.
Right.
She understood the value of letting ideas develop fully.
Right.
Of waiting for the right moment.
But wasn't she writing constantly? I mean, she's published so many books.
She was, but it was about active patience, not passive waiting.
Right.
She was constantly working.
Yeah.
Honing her craft, refining her ideas, even when she wasn't publishing.
Wow.
It's like the story of Thomas Edison.
Yeah.
And his thousands of failed attempts to create the light bulb.
Yeah, everyone knows that story. But what's interesting is that it's often told as a tale of perseverance.
Yeah.
But you're suggesting it's also about patience.
Yeah, I think perseverance and patience kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
It's not just about working hard. It's about trusting the process, allowing time for ideas to mature, and being willing to iterate, learn from setbacks.
That's a great point. And it makes me think about how we handle failure.
Right.
We talked about Floyd Patterson earlier.
Yeah.
But this time, the book focuses on his comeback.
Yeah.
After a devastating loss.
Right. He didn't let that defeat define him. He came back stronger and ultimately reclaimed the title.
Right.
It's a reminder that setbacks are inevitable, but they don't have to be the end of the story.
Yeah.
It's about having the resilience to get back up, keep fighting.
So it's not just about discipline in those moments of peak performance. It's also about the discipline to keep going when things get tough.
Totally. Yeah. And it's about having the self-awareness to learn from our mistakes, make adjustments. And then the book kind of shifts gears a little bit and talks about the internal battle against pain using JFK struggles.
Okay, this is where I get a little skeptical.
Yeah.
Aren't we supposed to listen to our bodies and seek relief when we're in pain?
Of course. But, the book highlights, the dangers of relying on, quick fixes.
Right.
And avoiding discomfort altogether.
Right.
JFK's reliance on medication ultimately, masked the underlying issues.
Right.
And prevented him from addressing the, root causes of his pain.
So it's about finding that balance between, managing pain.
Right.
And not becoming, dependent
Yeah.
on external solutions.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that like discomfort is a part of life.
Yeah.
And sometimes pushing through it can lead to growth, resilience.
And it's like the ancient philosopher Epicurus.
Yeah.
And his like approach to pleasure.
Right.
Wait, Epicurus, I thought he was all about indulging.
Really?
You know.
In the good things in life.
Yeah.
That's the common misconception.
Right.
His philosophy actually emphasized like moderation, avoiding excess. He believed that like true pleasure comes from self-control and avoiding the pain that comes with like overindulgence.
So it's like that saying, like, everything in moderation, including moderation.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about finding that sweet spot.
Yeah.
Where we can enjoy life's pleasures without letting them control us.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
But how do we apply that to something like emotional control?
Yeah.
You know? I mean, sometimes it feels like our emotions just, like, take over.
Yeah. And the book offers like some interesting insights into that, using the example of Sam Cassell, this NBA player whose celebratory dance after a big play led to an injury that cost his team the championship.
Ouch. That's got to be tough to live with.
Yeah.
But it does illustrate the point that even in moments of excitement, we need to like maintain a certain level of control.
Right. It's not about like suppressing our emotions, but about channeling them appropriately.
Right.
And sometimes that means exercising, like restraint, even when we feel like letting loose.
So it's about having that like inner governor, that ability to like pause and choose our response.
Exactly.
Instead of just like reacting impulsively.
Exactly. And sometimes that restraint can have like major consequences, as we see with Churchill's decision to delay entering World War II.
But wasn't that a controversial decision?
It was, yeah.
Like, wouldn't it have been easier to just, like, give in to the pressure and join the fight right away?
It might have seemed that way at the time.
Right.
But Churchill understood, like, the importance of strategic restraint.
Right.
Of waiting for the right moment to strike.
So even in a situation as dire as, like, a world war, there's a place for, like, calculated restraint.
Totally, yeah. It's a reminder that sometimes the most disciplined action is to wait, to assess the situation fully, and to choose our battles wisely.
And that's a sharp contrast to the story of Napoleon.
Right.
Whose downfall was partly attributed to his, like, unchecked ambition and relentless pursuit of power. Ah, yes. The classic cautionary tale of ambition gone wrong.
Right.
But isn't ambition a good thing? I mean, we need people who are driven.
Totally.
You know.
We do.
To achieve great things.
Yeah. But, you know, I think the book suggests that it's about finding a balance between striving for excellence and appreciating what we already have. Napoleon's ambition ultimately led to his downfall because it became all-consuming, blinding him to other important values, priorities.
So it's not about abandoning ambition altogether, but about, like, tempering it with wisdom, humility.
Exactly. And that ties into the idea of, like, constant improvement, which the book explores through the teachings of Socrates. He believed that we should always strive to be better.
Yeah.
You know, that there's no finish line in the pursuit of virtue.
But isn't that exhausting? Like, shouldn't we be content with our progress at some point?
Yeah. It's not about, like, striving for perfection, but about embracing, like, a growth mindset.
Yeah.
You know, Socrates understood that we're all, like, works in progress and that the journey of self-improvement is lifelong.
So it's about finding, like, fulfillment in the process of growth. Not just, like, the end goal.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that our potential is limitless, you know? As long as we're willing to keep learning, evolving. And, you know, this connects to the idea of, like, sharing the load, which we saw with Martin Luther King Jr. and Harry Belafonte. And then the book tells the story of Admiral Rickover challenging a young James Stavridis to always give his best.
Oh, wow.
Emphasizing the importance of, like, striving for excellence.
That's a powerful reminder that our effort matters, regardless of the task. But isn't there a danger in pushing ourselves too hard? In striving for excellence in, like, every single thing we do. Doesn't that lead to burnout?
It can, if we're not mindful. But I think the key here is about approaching every task. With intention. Focus. It's about bringing our best selves. To whatever we're doing, whether it's, you know, washing the dishes. or writing a symphony.
So it's about that, like, internal standard of excellence rather than, like, external validation or recognition.
Exactly. And that brings us to Antoninus Pius, this Roman emperor, known for his temperance, quiet dedication to duty, virtuous leadership.
Oh, he sounds like a fascinating figure. What can we learn from him about self-discipline?
Well, he's like a great example of someone who like embodied self-control in all aspects of his life. He didn't seek like fame, glory. He simply focused on doing what was right, leading with integrity, compassion. He understood that like true leadership comes from within, not from external validation.
That's a powerful lesson, especially in, today's world.
Totally.
Where it's so easy to get caught up in like the pursuit of status and recognition. But Antoninus Pius focused on like the internal work. On being a good person and doing what was right. Regardless of who was watching.
Totally. And his example inspired Marcus Aurelius, who faced numerous challenges during his reign while maintaining his composure, commitment to virtue. He learned from Antoninus Pius that like true strength lies not in like power, dominance, but in self-control. Adherence to one's principles.
So it's about finding that inner strength. To stay true to ourselves. Even when the world around us like feels chaotic. And unpredictable.
Totally. And it's a reminder that like true leadership isn't about controlling others, but about mastering ourselves.
That's a profound insight. And one that I think we can all benefit from, like reflecting on. But before we get too philosophical, let's bring it back to like the practical side of self-discipline. What other strategies does the book offer for navigating those daily challenges?
Well, one interesting contrast the book highlights is between Cato the Younger, who's known for his like strict personal discipline and his tolerance for his brother's different lifestyle.
So even though Cato was like incredibly disciplined in his own life, he didn't like judge or criticize others for their choices?
Exactly. It's a valuable lesson, I think, in like humility, understanding. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking our way is the only way, but Cato's example reminds us that there are like many paths to virtue. It's about focusing on our own self-improvement while respecting the choices of others.
That's such an important reminder, especially in a world where it's so easy to like judge and criticize others online.
Totally.
Cato's story suggests that like true self-discipline involves a certain level of self-awareness. And humility. Recognizing that our way isn't necessarily the only way.
Exactly. And that humility can help us like stay grounded when we face like challenges, setbacks. Speaking of which, the book kind of circles back to this idea of like grace under pressure, using Hemingway's definition as a starting point.
Remind us of Hemingway's definition of courage. Something about grace.
So he defined courage as grace under pressure. And the book highlights Queen Elizabeth's stoicism. Floyd Patterson's comeback as like examples of this principle in action. It's about maintaining like composure, dignity in challenging situations, responding with grace rather than like reactivity.
So it's not about suppressing our emotions altogether, but about channeling them in a way that allows us to like stay present and act with intention even when we're feeling like stressed or overwhelmed.
Exactly. It's about finding that like inner strength to stay calm, focused. Even when the world around us feels chaotic.
That's a powerful skill to cultivate. And one that I think we can all benefit from, developing. But how do we do that? Does the book offer any practical, like, tips?
Well, one interesting example the book explores is General Mattis's leadership philosophy. He emphasized, like, selflessness and holding himself to a higher standard than his subordinates.
So it's about leading by example. Walking the talk. And demonstrating the qualities that we want to see in others.
Exactly. And it's about being willing to like make sacrifices. For the greater good. Mattis understood that. Like true leadership isn't about power, authority. It's about serving others and inspiring them to be their best selves.
That's a powerful message and one that resonates like deeply with me.
Yeah.
But it also raises the question of how we balance that selflessness
Yeah.
with our own needs and desires.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we can't pour from an empty cup.
Right.
Right.
That's a great point. And I think that's where the concept of like self-care comes in. It's not selfish to prioritize our own well-being.
Right.
It's essential
Right.
for us to be able to show up fully for others.
So it's like that oxygen mask analogy on an airplane, right? You have to put on your own mask before you can help others.
Right. And it ties into the idea of like boundaries.
Yeah.
Of knowing when to say no, protecting our time, energy.
Right.
Which brings us to one of the most powerful examples of like restraint, selflessness.
Okay.
In the book, George Washington's decision to step down from power.
Wow.
Twice.
That's an incredible act of self-discipline.
It is.
Most people would like cling to power if they had the chance.
Yeah. Totally.
What motivated Washington to make that choice?
It was a testament to his commitment to serving the greater good.
Right.
And his understanding that like true power lies not in clinging to control, but in relinquishing it.
Wow.
For the benefit of others.
Right.
You know, he recognized that the young nation needed like a peaceful transition of power to establish a stable democracy.
So it was a strategic decision, but also like a deeply personal one.
Yeah, totally.
A reflection of his values.
Yeah.
His commitment to the principles he like believed in.
Exactly. And it's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most courageous act is to step back, to let go, and to trust that others can carry the torch forward.
That's a beautiful sentiment, and one that I think we can all learn from.
Yeah.
But before we get too sentimental, let's explore one final example of self-discipline in action.
Right.
The story of Martin Luther King Jr. being physically assaulted.
Yeah.
And choosing to respond with nonviolence.
Forgiveness.
That's, that's a powerful testament to the strength it takes to overcome like our baser instincts and respond with like grace, compassion, even in the face of like aggression, hatred.
Right.
You know, King understood that meeting violence with violence would only perpetuate the cycle of pain, suffering.
So it was about breaking that cycle, about rising above the fray and choosing like a different path, even when it was like incredibly difficult.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that true strength lies not in retaliation, but in rising above the impulse to meet negativity with negativity.
Wow, what a powerful journey through the concept of self-discipline. We've covered so much ground.
Totally.
From ancient heroes to modern-day leaders. It's clear that self-discipline is not like a one-size-fits-all concept.
Right.
But a like multifaceted quality that can manifest in countless ways.
I agree. And what's fascinating is how these stories from the past
can still feel so relevant to our lives today. It shows that the challenges of like self-control, willpower are timeless. And that the wisdom of these historical figures can still offer like guidance, inspiration as we navigate our own journeys.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up, I'm curious to hear your like overall thoughts on the book. What are some of the key takeaways that like resonated with you?
Oh man, there are so many. But I think one of the most important is that discipline is not about like deprivation. Punishment. It's about empowerment. Freedom. It's about making choices that align with our values, goals, you know, so we can live like more fulfilling, meaningful lives.
That's a great point. It's not about being a robot or denying ourselves all pleasure. It's about being intentional and creating a life that we're proud of.
Exactly. And I think another key takeaway is that self-discipline is like a journey. Not a destination. You know, there will be setbacks, challenges along the way. But the key is to keep learning, growing, and striving to be our best selves.
I love that. It's about embracing the process. Recognizing that we're all works in progress.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's a message that we can all like benefit from hearing.
Well said. But before we sign off, I know you've prepared a 10-point summary of the key takeaways from Discipline is Destiny. I'm eager to hear your insights.
Okay, let's distill it down to 10 essential points. Right. So number 1, Discipline is a choice. It's a daily practice, not a one-time event.
Right.
Yeah. It's about those small decisions that we make throughout the day, like, Hercules at the crossroads, choosing the path of long-term growth over immediate gratification.
So it's not about being perfect all the time, but about consistently, making those choices.
Totally.
That align with our, values and goals.
Exactly. And that leads to our second point, which is, like any craft, discipline is developed through consistent effort.
Right.
Action. Remember Aristotle's idea of virtue as a practice?
Right.
It's about putting in the work day after day, building those habits until they become second nature.
So it's like practicing a musical instrument.
Right.
Or training for a marathon.
Totally.
Takes time, dedication, a willingness to push through those moments of frustration, discomfort.
Yeah, absolutely. Which brings us to point number 3. Temperance, a key aspect of discipline, is about finding balance.
Right.
Control in all areas of life. It's not about deprivation, but about being the charioteer of our own lives.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
It's about finding that sweet spot between indulging and restraining ourselves.
Totally.
Recognizing that both extremes can be detrimental.
Right. That leads to point number 4. Pushing through discomfort. Resistance is essential for achieving meaningful goals.
Yeah.
That's right.
Think about Lou Gehrig.
Right.
Playing through pain.
Right.
Or Toni Morrison writing in the stillness of dawn.
Right. Yeah.
Real growth.
Yeah.
Often happens.
Yeah.
Outside our comfort zones.
So it's not about avoiding discomfort altogether, but about recognizing that it's often a necessary part of the process.
Exactly. Yeah. And that ties into point number 5. Utilizing time wisely, especially the quiet morning hours, can significantly enhance productivity. The attack the dawn strategy is about reclaiming those precious hours before the distractions of the day take over.
It's like giving ourselves a head start, tapping into that focused energy.
Exactly.
That often fades, as the day goes on.
Yeah. All right, point number 6. Conquering bad habits, regardless of their duration, is essential for regaining control over one's life. Remember Richard Feynman quitting drinking.
Right.
Eisenhower quitting smoking.
Yeah.
It's about making that decision.
Right.
Sticking to it.
Yeah. Even when it's hard.
So it's not about being a slave to our habits, but about taking ownership of our choices.
Right.
And creating the life that we want.
Exactly. Which connects to point number 7. Minimizing superfluous desires and focusing on essential needs can lead to greater freedom, satisfaction.
Right.
Cato the Elder's frugality reminds us that true contentment often comes from simplifying our lives, focusing on what truly matters.
It's about recognizing that more doesn't always equal better.
Yeah.
And that sometimes, letting go of things can actually lead to, greater fulfillment.
Absolutely. And that leads to point number 8. Managing one's workload and prioritizing rest is crucial for long-term success and well-being.
Right.
Greg Popovich.
Yeah.
And the tragic story of James Forrestal highlight the importance of finding a sustainable pace.
Right.
Avoiding burnout, making time for recovery.
So it's not about pushing ourselves to the limit all the time, but about recognizing our limits.
Right.
And honoring our need for rest and rejuvenation.
Right. Which ties into point number 9. Sleep is a vital aspect of discipline.
Right.
Crucial for both physical and mental performance.
Right.
Floyd Patterson, Admiral Stavridis demonstrate that prioritizing sleep is not a sign of weakness, but a strategic investment in our ability to function at our best.
It's about recognizing that our bodies and minds need time to recharge.
Totally.
And that sleep is not a luxury, but a necessity.
It is.
For optimal performance.
All right. And finally, number 10. Finding joy and balance in the pursuit of discipline is essential for a fulfilling and sustainable approach to life.
Right.
Manu Ginobili's story reminds us that self-discipline shouldn't feel like a constant grind.
Right.
It's about finding that sweet spot.
Yeah.
Where we can challenge ourselves, strive for excellence, and still experience the joy of the journey.
I love that. It's about embracing the whole experience, the ups and downs, the challenges, triumphs.
Yeah.
And finding a sense of fulfillment in the process itself.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of self-discipline.
Yeah.
It's not about achieving some distant goal.
Right.
Or becoming some idealized version of ourselves. It's about becoming the best versions of ourselves right now in this moment.
Yeah.
And finding joy and meaning in that journey.
What a powerful reminder. So there you have it, folks.
Yeah.
Our 10-point cheat sheet for mastering self-discipline.
That's right.
Inspired by the wisdom of historical figures. And Ryan Holiday's insightful book, Discipline is Destiny.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling inspired to, take action.
Yeah, me too. And remember, this is just a starting point.
Right.
There's so much more to explore in the book.
Yeah.
And I encourage you to dive in and discover your own insights and inspirations.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Discipline is Destiny.
Yeah.
I hope you found it insightful.
I did too.
Empowering.
Yeah.
And maybe even a little bit life-changing.
Totally.
Until next time, keep striving.
Yeah.
Keep growing.
Keep growing.
And remember, discipline is destiny.
It is. It is.